I've been dying to tell this story, though I know no one is bound to believe me. I don't even want to tell my parents in fear that they'll stare at me in disbelief and think that I'm crazy. So here I am, anonymously telling it to a group of strangers in hopes that someone will believe me and give me some peace of mind. It started out a few months ago when we moved into our new home. I grew up in a rural community, but there were plenty of neighbors and mostly fields around, and no woods. Given that I'm the youngest child, my parents waited until I was done with high school to move, as to not affect my already established life. Although we had always lived in a small, rural community, my parents were ready for something a little more secluded, something with a lot of acreage, woods, and a place to shoot. They put my childhood home up on the market and soon found their dream home, which is where I am currently, and desperately conveying this story. The house and the property are beautiful. It's a large, turn-of-the-century house facing 15 acres of land, the majority of which are woods, and a nice half-acre pond. The best part, or so I thought, is that there are no neighbors within a mile of us. At first I really enjoyed it. Being out in the woods was very much a cathartic experience for me. It helped shed the stresses of school and studying. Being among the tall trees and the surrounding nature made all of my problems seem totally insignificant. So I made a habit of going on regular walks to the woods. As the weeks went on, I started noticing strange things as I went on my walks. I would find partially eaten deer scattered along the leaf-littered ground, accompanied by a putrid, rotting smell, which is attributed to the carcass in front of me. At first, I thought nothing of it. It was probably coyotes, I would tell myself. Other than that, I thought nothing of it. But I started carrying a gun with me on my walks in case I encountered the animal that was responsible for the carnage I saw in front of me. As the days went on, I started noticing more and more mutilated deer scattered across the floor of the woods, still accompanied by the rotting smell, which I again attributed to the animals. If the increasing number of mutilations weren't enough, I started to notice a change in the sounds coming out of the woods. Which was once a cacophony of sounds was now mostly dead silence, minus the low, guttural growl that seemed to be becoming more prevalent, more pronounced, and more insidious each day. By this point, I had stopped going on my little walks. A gun or no gun, I didn't want to risk the chances of facing whatever was causing these events. That being said, my curiosity eventually got the best of me one night, as I heard its growls. I decided that I was going to go get a trail cam and set it up out in the woods the following day, in hopes of finally seeing what was out there. The next evening, after work, I gathered up what little courage I had left and, camera in hand, went walking out into the very woods I had promised myself I would stay out of. I never did get to set up the trail cam. I lost it somewhere in the woods while I was in a panic, running for my life. I made it about 100 yards past the tree lines into the woods, where I decided to stop and set up the camera. I thought it was a good place to set up, but quite frankly, I was too scared to go any farther. After all, I wanted to spend as little time out there as possible, given the ongoing events, and the fact that it would be dark soon didn't help. Already on edge, every creak of the wood and every churn in the leaves sent me into a panic. Rushing to set the camera up, I dropped it, sending it to the leaf-ridden ground with a thud. Murmuring under my breath and cursing myself for being out there, I bent down to pick the camera up, and I started to smell that putrid smell of rotting flesh again. I carefully looked around, checking my surroundings to see if anything was out there. I could feel something watching me, but I couldn't see anything. Just as I finished packing my supplies off the ground, I heard that low, guttural growl again, as well as the snap of a branch to my right. I quickly turned, seeing a human-like creature standing there, staring at me. I was completely frozen with fear. It had human features, standing on two legs, and it had feet and hands. The two things that threw me off, however, was the fact that its skin was charred black, as if it had been burned in fire. And, most disturbingly, it had no upper or lower lips. Although mostly bald, a few thin, straggling hairs stuck every which way out of its scalp. Its sharp teeth were hanging out like hypodermic needles. With the absence of lips, its raw, red gums hung out in the open. Thick strings of what appeared to be saliva dripped off its chin in a persistent stream. For one single, brief moment, the world around me seemed to stop. I quickly went through my options on what to do. There were really only two viable options. Either stay exactly how I was and get attacked and most likely killed by this thing, or I could get the fuck out of there. I chose the latter. I quickly scrambled to my feet and ran as fast as I could, throwing my camera in vain at the creature behind me. In the chaos of what had just occurred, I found myself to be momentarily lost after running in what I thought was the right direction for what felt like 20 minutes, but I'm sure it was only 30 seconds. Looking around and not seeing the spawn of hell that I had just encountered, I stopped to collect myself and try to find the way back to the house. I finally decided on the general direction in which I should head, when I then heard a commotion that almost sounded like a horse pounding its hooves on the dirt. I looked behind me and saw that thing, whatever it was, running at me on all fours, spit fire out of the corners of its mouth like a rabid dog. I ran as quickly as I possibly could without daring to look behind me. Although I would not look at it, I could hear it galloping behind me, and smelled its rotted flesh. Tears ran down my eyes, as I thought that there was no possible way to make it out of the woods alive, when I finally saw the lights of my house out in the clearing. Using what little adrenaline I had left to sprint the 200 yards or so to my back porch, I quickly opened the door and slammed it shut, not daring to look out the window. It's been about a month now since this happened. I haven't told anyone, and I will not dare to go back out into those woods. I've been doing a lot of research to see if I could find any clues as to what that thing might have been. I've exhausted myself, but I think I may have come to a conclusion. The closest thing I could find was possibly a skinwalker. I know my sighting doesn't entirely match up with the stories I've heard, but it's the closest thing I've found. Any suggestions on what it might be would be greatly appreciated. I always knew exactly what kind of gifts my grandma likes for Christmas, because of something very strange that happened to her when she was just a child. My family is from Chile, all the way down in South America, and my grandmother grew up in a city called Talca, 5 hours south of the capital city, Santiago de Chile. Talca is a beautiful, small city with stone-paved streets, surrounded by forests and rivers, and the Andes Mountains to the east. This city is more than 300 years old, and my grandmother's house, the one she grew up in and still lives in, is more than 200 years old, an old colonial house with lots of rooms and a courtyard in the middle. And in a 200-plus-year-old house, whenever I visit my grandma, I know I have roommates. I can always feel their eyes following me around. Growing up in this big old house, my grandma, still only a toddler, would sometimes have a difficult time sleeping. She'd see faces staring at her in the dark. She'd wake up in the middle of the night screaming due to night terrors. Almost every night, her mother, a woman with a fiery temperament I also inherited, would have to go soothe her back to sleep, reassuring her there was nothing to fear in that house. Only old memories, nothing more. But one night, the night terrors stopped. My baby grandma was about to sleep peacefully throughout the night. However, Instead of being woken up by the screaming and crying of her child, my great-grandmother would wake up in the middle of the night, thinking she heard a croaky male voice coming from my baby grandma's room. "That's impossible. That's just my imagination," she said to herself, and she'd go back to sleep. After a few days of waking up thinking she heard a croaky male voice in my baby grandma's room, my great-grandma decided to investigate. But every time she'd hear the voice and try to approach my baby grandma's room, the creaking of those old hardwood floors would give away that she was approaching, and the voice stopped. When she'd go check in the room, there was nothing there, only my baby grandma peacefully sleeping. One day, my great-grandmother took my baby grandma to play with our kids at a neighborhood park. In those days during the Great Depression, there was not a lot of money to go around for fancy toys, so sunshine and good old dirt and lots of imagination had to do. And thus, my great-grandma was intrigued when she noticed my baby grandma was carrying along a beautiful porcelain doll they certainly hadn't bought for her. A pretty little thing with strawberry blonde hair and gray eyes. "Where did you get that from?" my great-grandma asked. "It's a secret," said my baby grandma. "Did you find it last time we were at the park?" questioned my great-grandma. "I can't tell you, Mommy. He says it's our secret." My great-grandma, being a fiery woman, didn't put up with her child's secrets, and after a good spanking, she got her child to tell her who gave her the doll. "It was my betrothed," said my baby grandma, but such a silly thing to say for a child. My great-grandma thought her child must have heard the word from one of the ladies at church, but what about the doll? My baby grandma must have found it or stolen it from a rich kid at the playground. That was the most logical explanation. My baby grandma got another spanking, so she learned she must never steal. But then, more and more pretty dolls started appearing in my baby grandma's room. My great-grandma thought they could still be explained logically, but we all know about logic. And then things got a bit stranger. In the 1930s, in the middle of the Great Depression, people had to learn to live with just the essentials. Many barely had enough to eat, so it was alarming when all manners of rich cakes and sweets started appearing under my baby grandma's bed. Every time my great-grandma would go clean up her child's room, she'd find some kind of pastry. She'd ask her child about it, and all my baby grandma would say is, "My betrothed." This went on for a few weeks, and one day, besides pretty dolls and rich sweets, pieces of jewelry appeared, always under my baby grandma's pillow. Small things. One of them, a particularly beautiful string of black Baroque pearls, caught my great-grandmother's attention. She knew none of that jewelry belonged to her. She came from a wealthy family, and she had married for love, and married down her class. And now she kept her good jewels in a box, what was left of them, at least. Only for special occasions. In those days, there was not much to celebrate. All of these occurrences were harmless, and yet my great-grandma couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling they caused her. What was it that was gifting those things to her child? She needed to know. So one night, she decided to sleep outside my baby grandma's door, waiting for whatever it was that came into her child's room. But instead, she woke up to a croaky male's voice, already inside her child's room, and as quietly and quickly as she could, she lit a large candle and opened the door. What she saw sent a chill down her spine and made her break into a cold sweat. She saw the silhouette of a man, very thin, with normal proportions of a grown man, but so short it could be called a dwarf. This figure, in fractions of a second, jumped from my baby grandma's bed and onto the floor and slithered under the bed. It happened so fast, all my great-grandma saw by candlelight was barely a shadow. My baby grandma was peacefully asleep, and my great-grandma, feeling her heart beating in her throat, quickly entered the room, directly checking under the bed, but there was nothing. She checked every corner of that room, but nothing. No little man, no entrance for him, no hole on the ground or the walls, nothing. My great-grandma picked up her child in her arms and took her into her own bedroom, holding her in her arms for the rest of the night, unable to sleep. In the morning, my great-grandma took my baby grandma to a bakery downtown and bought her the best slice of pie she could afford, determining to get the truth out of her child. The conversation went something like this. "Do you love Mommy?" "Yes, Mommy, I love you. From here all the way to Santiago and back." "Then I hope you know Mommy loves you too, more than my own life. And there must be no secrets between us, don't you think?" "Yes, Mommy, that's right." "Sweetheart, then won't you tell Mommy where did you get those dolls and sweets and jewelry that have appeared in your room?" "I told you, Mommy. It was my betrothed." "And who is your betrothed?" "He comes into my bed every night because I couldn't sleep well before. So he comes into my bed with me, and he kisses me and cuddles me, strokes my hair and holds me all night. He spoons me and tells me he loves me and that soon he'll take me with him and we'll get married, and I'll live happily with him happily ever after." She was shocked and said with a trembling voice, holding back tears of terror, "And where does he want to take you?" "I don't know, Mommy. I guess he lives under the house, under our city. And he'll take me soon, and we'll be married and live happily ever after. He's my Prince Charming, and I'm his bride." My great-grandma was trembling, but fiery woman she was. There was no way she would let anyone or anything mess with her child, even if it seems to be harmless until now. My great-grandma went to the local priest and asked him to bless the house, expelling whatever unclean things there might be in the house, especially in my baby grandma's room. And the priest did. And for one night, things were quiet. But then things got truly bad. The following night, my great-grandparents woke up to the shrieking of my baby grandma, and they ran into her room. She had scratch marks all across her back, and bite marks on her stomach and her thighs, and chunks of her hair had been pulled so hard, her scalp was bleeding. Mommy, he's mad. I told you about him. He says I'm his, and he can do whatever he wants with me." That night, nobody was able to sleep. They waited until the morning and visited another priest for another blessing, and another night, and another attack. The second one worse than before. Bites and bloody scratches all throughout my baby grandma's body, her pajamas torn to shreds. The next morning, my great-grandma, desperate to protect her child, went and saw a Jewish rabbi who gave her an amulet of protection to place around her child's neck. That night, same story. This time my baby grandma's hair had been cut off, and she was covered in black and blue bruises. "Mommy, he said he wants to make me so ugly, nobody but him would want to touch me. He says it's all your fault." My great-grandma was desperate. She was a pious woman and trusted in the Lord, but she knew that the Lord works in mysterious ways. The next morning, she spoke with her sister, who told her about a cunning woman who lived 2 hours away, in a smaller town towards the Andes Mountains, called Paso Nevado, and that this cunning woman knew things. She was a Machi, a Mapuche shaman, an indigenous folk healer, and she'd know how to deal with what's going on. My great-grandma went to see the Machi, the cunning woman, and the Machi told her that these things, these dwarves, they like little children, and sometimes they become so obsessed with some of them that they take them away, and their parents never see them again. Nobody knows what happens to the children, There are only strange legends about their fates. But these things, they are very clean. They hate dirt. They hate anything filthy. That's why they love pretty children, because they never smell as grown-ups do. So the only way to make him go away is to disgust him so much he'd never want to touch the child again. They'd have to cover the child in human feces and let her sleep like that throughout the night. My great-grandma was desperate enough to try anything. So that night she scooped up some of her own filth from the toilet bowl and with her hands smeared it all over my baby grandma, asking her to trust her on this, as the child complained it stank so badly. That night they all went to sleep. Suddenly, my great-grandparents woke up to shrieking and screaming. This time, not the voice of my baby grandma, but a male voice, bellowing like a trumpet sounds through a hollow tree. When they entered the child's room, it was trashed. The mattress was slashed, feathers from the pillows flying everywhere, porcelain dolls smashed against the walls, a broken window, and cakes and sweets smeared on the walls. But my baby grandma was unharmed, and the thing was nowhere in sight. It never returned.